Genesis chapter 12. And the first 3 verses, now the Lord had said unto Abraham, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Then in the 17th chapter of Genesis, verses 7 and 8, And I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee in their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. I want to speak to you today on Israel, God's miracle nation. Israel, God's miracle nation. I've just returned from a most unusual trip to the Middle East. We had a fabulous tour of that country with the most informed guide that I've ever had. We had the equivalent to a college course on the Middle East. We had our guide had a thorough biblical knowledge and historical knowledge of the Bible and of the land. It was an experience that we shall never forget. But you must also understand we were there as guests of the Israel government. Hence we had opportunities the average tour group does not have. We were invited into the Knesset and were briefed by 3 of the top leaders of Israel. Nathan Lorch, who is the General Secretary of the Knesset, Asher Nahum, Secretary of Information of Foreign Affairs, and Ehud Olmert, a leading member of the Knesset, who would be equivalent to one of our top senators here in the United States. Just a little information about Israel itself and their government. The ruling cabinet is the Knesset, in case you don't understand fully what it is. They have a parliamentary democracy. The prime minister is the head of the executive branch of the government. There are 10 parties in the Knesset. We have 2 parties here in the States, but they have 10 separate parties, and each party makes its own rules. Mr. Begin has 48 seats in the Knesset, which is barely enough for him to hold his position, although I understand he has gained in popularity, and if a vote would be taken today, he'd have far more than that. They told us, your coming here demonstrates your friendship to the Israel government. They explained to us why they annexed the Golden Heights, which has been discussed pro and con in the news media for quite some time. Overlooking one of the largest valleys where there's great numbers of Israel villages is the Golden Heights. They took us up on the Golden Heights and we toured all across the top of the Golden Heights. The armies of the Assyrians of Syria was on top of the Golden Heights before the war, And all of these villages were vulnerable. They didn't have a moment of peace. They were shooting at them continually. They had it within their power to destroy all of the cities in that huge valley, and actually would be the means of crippling the entire Israel nation as a whole. The Golden Heights overlooks this huge valley, and they determined that for their own safety, they would have to take the Golden Heights. They were greatly outnumbered. However, somehow all the way through the nation of Israel, it seems as if God somehow has his hand upon that nation. God made some promises to that nation, and they've been able to do unbelievable things that have startled the entire world. And they were able to destroy the armies on top of the Golden Heights and take all of that territory. And they're determined to keep it for the security reasons. We'll not discuss the right or wrong of the thing politically. From a security standpoint, we can certainly understand their view. Israel is a small country surrounded by 140 million Arabs in 22 different states who have an annual income from oil of $140 billion. They said, we have no nations to help us, and we have made everything in this nation that you see with our own hands. They're being fought by the Arabs on three fronts. First, by boycotts. Second, their threat to boycott any nation who sells or buys from Israel. And third, on the diplomatic front. They've influenced the United Nations and others who have made a strong stand against Israel. They say also we cannot join with the Arab countries because they will not accept us. Not only have they refused to accept them, they've refused, most of them, to even recognize them as a nation. They said, we want peace with the Arabs. We seek peace with the Arabs. We have made compromises with the Arabs, but we want to live. They said, we're giving up Sinai, which is 3 times the size of Israel. Even though it's a desert, it is a buffer from the closest neighbor, the very large neighbor that they have. The Arab states are 99.5 times larger than Israel. Israel has a feeling that they're being betrayed by the United Nations, and also they're fearful now they're being betrayed by the United States. The Secretary General made the very alarming statement. When you stop and think it through, he said a desperate Israel will be a dangerous Israel. A desperate Israel will be a dangerous Israel. They've come out with a warning since we've returned to the States. I believe we heard it in New York after we had arrived in New York. They came out with a statement, we will not permit the United States to arm Jordan. Now this may sound like a rather presuming statement that they've made, as if they could keep the United States from arming Jordan. That wasn't what they meant. They meant, remember, Iraq. The arms that goes to Jordan, the sophisticated planes that are furnished Jordan by the United States, will be destroyed by Israel. This is a threat that they're now making. Israel leaders are very conscious of God's covenant to Abraham. to give Israel the land of Palestine. One of the leaders who was speaking to us very enthusiastically said some have compared us giving the Panama Canal away and so on, losing the Panama Canal to them, and suddenly stopped and looked and grinned just a little and said, I don't find anywhere in the Bible where God promised to give the Panama Canal to the United States. And of course his implication was he did find in the Bible where God promised to give the land of Palestine to Israel. And this is true no matter what your attitude is, no matter what your thoughts might be. There's one thing that makes me a friend of Israel, and that's the fact that they're the friend of God. They're God's chosen people. And God gave the land to them by covenant. And therefore I have to believe that God's going to restore all that land to them. If you should ask, why are you for the nation of Israel? My answer would be because they are God's covenant people. They are God's covenant people. And God said, I'll give you the land as an everlasting inheritance, and he gave the borders of that land. There need be no fear. Those borders are still there. And God gave it to them. And we read in Genesis chapter 12 and verses 1 to 3 and notice 7 things that God said about this nation. First, he said, I will make of thee a great nation. Second, he said, I will bless thee. Third, he said, I will make thy name great. Fourth, he said, thou shalt be a blessing. Fifth, he said, I will bless them that bless thee. Sixth, he said, I will curse him that curseth thee. And seventh, in thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. If you would study history in relation to the nation of Israel, since God made that promise and gave that covenant to Israel, you'd find that the nations who have befriended Israel have been blessed of the Lord. And you'll find in every case the nations that have cursed Israel, God has cursed. He promised that he would. He has fulfilled that up till now. He will continue to fulfill that until the end. Then we notice in Genesis 17 and verses 7 and 8, I will establish my covenant between me and thee, and thy seed after thee, in their generations, for an everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, and I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. You can't buck that kind of a covenant. God made that covenant with Israel. Whatever the United States does, whatever the United Nations do, whatever the Arab states may do, you can be sure of one thing: God is going to keep that covenant, and the day is coming when all of the land that God has promised to the nation of Israel, they will possess, and one day will dwell there safely. This is not true today. They are not dwelling there safely now. What we see in Israel now is not the final fulfillment of the regathering of the nations back to Palestine to dwell safely in that land. It is the stage setting for the final fulfillment of it. They'll yet go through great tribulation. They'll be driven from the city of Jerusalem. They'll have to flee from that city. It'll be taken over by the Antichrist. But then at the proper time, the eternal God who made the covenant with Israel will step in. And He'll destroy those nations, and Israel will be brought back and dwell in that land safely. And then He will be their God. Today I fear He is not their God. They believe profoundly in the Old Testament Scripture. They believe in all the prophecies concerning the nation of Israel, but they have never seen, they have never come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ as the Messiah that God promised. They're still looking for the Messiah. They're still praying for the Messiah. But they do not recognize that Jesus Christ is that Messiah. But one day they will. And they'll mourn after Him as a mother mourns after her firstborn. And a nation will be born in a day. And then Israel will sing during the 1,000-year millennial kingdom. You'll hear that great chorus of Israelites as they sing, He was wounded for our transgression. He was bruised for our iniquity. The chastisement of our peace was upon Him, and with His stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We turned every man to his own way, and the Lord hath laid upon Him the iniquity of us all. That's future, but it's sure. It's sure. There's never been a nation in all the history of the world, I think, that has been persecuted like the nation of Israel. Any other nation that had undergone the things that Israel has gone through, I seriously doubt if they'd be in existence today. When Frederick the Great asked the court preacher for an unanswerable proof in one word of the inspiration of the Bible, he answered, "The Jew, Your Majesty." The Jew, Your Majesty. For something like 4,000 years now, the Jew's taken a prominent place in history. Scattered among the nations, slaughtered without mercy, abused and downtrodden, denied the privileges of others, the Jew has continued until today and is more numerous than ever before. There's more Jews in New York City than there is in Israel. And they're scattered throughout many other nations of the world. Every diabolical plan that satanic ingenuity could devise has been used against the Jew. Any ordinary nation under the ceaseless persecution that has befallen the Jew would have been exterminated long ago. But the Jew has been preserved. And we ask, how can we explain this miracle? Surely God must have some good purpose in view. What greater proof of the inspiration of the Bible could there be? The Jew has neither been absorbed in the nations around him, nor has he become extinct. At the overthrow of Jerusalem AD 70 by the Roman army, the suffering of the Jewish people was beyond description. Famine reigned within the city. People would snatch food from even their children. Some mothers even killed, cooked, and ate their children. Those who left the city were captured and crucified outside the walls. So horrible was the situation that Titus called God to witness that he was not responsible for what happened. Josephus tells us that over 1 million perished and 97,000 were captured during that time. 65 years later, when the Jews were finally dispersed by Hadrian, there were 580,000 persons slain. In AD 1020, Canute banished all Jews from England. There was an attempt made in 1096 to murder all European Jews who refused baptism. They were forced to pay $300,000 to assist the Crusaders. Under Richard I, they were murdered in large numbers. The tragedy of York Castle will never be forgotten. They first slaughtered one another, after which they set the castle afire. Edward I drove every one of them out of England, and there is no evidence that a Jew ever trod on British soil for 400 years. In France and Germany, it was worse. The year 1306 saw 100,000 Jews stripped of their possessions and cast out of the land. The plague of the Black Death was blamed on the Jews. As a result, they underwent the most horrible torture, including the caldron and the devouring flame. In Strasbourg, 2,000 Jews were fastened to an immense scaffold, and the scaffold was set on fire. As a result of the Spanish Inquisition, men and women disappeared by the hundreds. Some never returned. Others returned pale, emaciated, and semi-insane as results of being incarcerated in a dark, chilly dungeons. And what of Germany and Hitlerism? 6 million Jews cruelly put to death. Such has been the unspeakable history of the Jewish nightmare. But thank God the Jews have at last a home of their own. And believe me, they're proud of that heritage. They look upon the city of Jerusalem and say with great emotion, "We shall never give up the city of Jerusalem again. It shall never be divided again." The cry that you hear from many lips, "Remember Masada! Remember Masada!" They have a deep sense of loyalty such as I have never experienced in all of my life. I said to the preachers that were around me, as we listened to those speakers, I said, "Oh, that we could have that kind of loyalty and nationalism in the United States." People nowadays don't even salute the flag. I even heard one preacher say on this trip, when someone asked him, "Are you loyal to the United States?" he said, "No." He went on to explain he tried to be a good citizen, but he felt that he had no direct responsibility to be loyal to a country. I do. I don't know about you. This is the land that God has given us. This is the land of our heritage. God bless America. And God help us to bless it, and honor and respect it, and be loyal to it. But even now there's constant turmoil between the Jews and the Arabs. There is a holy hatred of many of the Arab states toward the Jews. And if they had their way, they would exterminate them, just as Hitler did. Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. I was in all of these cities, and they've become flourishing modern cities. The Jews are turning the Holy Land into a rich, fruitful land where it was once wasteland. I was over there in 1958, and all of that country was just a barren desert. Today the mountains are covered with trees. Some 14 million trees have been planted. That which was a desert has been irrigated, and today there's some of the greatest citrus fruit to be found anywhere in the world. And there's gardens that you simply would hardly believe how they're flourishing, and the produce that's coming from the farming of that desert land that God is causing to blossom like the rose, even as He said that He would. They'll someday possess all of that land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates. One of the most significant facts in history is that the Jew and not the Arab was dispersed among the nations. It wasn't the Arabs who were related to the Jews that were dispersed among the Arabs. It was the Jew. That's who God said it would be. Go now where you please, and you'll find the Jew flourishing. What a vindication of inspiration. Leviticus 26:33, and I will scatter you among the nations, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Deuteronomy 4:25-27, when thou shalt beget children and children's children, and ye shall have remained long in the land, and shall corrupt yourselves and make an image, a graven image, or a likeness of anything, and shall do evil in the sight of the Lord thy God, to provoke Him to anger, I will call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, and ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, where the Lord shall lead you. Deuteronomy 28:64, the Lord shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. We could go on and read countless numbers of prophecies in the Word of God and scriptures that tells us positively that God will scatter them among the other nations because of their sin. And then we could read you positively where God said, I will regather them from those nations and bring them back into their own land. Oh, my friends, in Babylon the Jew was a captive. Today, Babylonians are gone, but the Jews still live on. The Jews are still God's ancient people. And a God-planned destiny yet awaits them. And we owe so much to them. It was the Jews that gave us the Bible. Humanly speaking, it was inspired from God. Jesus Himself was a Jew according to the flesh. Jerusalem will ultimately be taken over by the Antichrist, but the Jews will finally possess it, be born in a day, receive Christ, and dwell safely in that land. And somehow as we think of these things, we ask again in the light of this, if the Jew is God's time clock, what time is it? I don't think there was a person that went to that land with us that came back on that giant 747 and that applauded when the plane landed in the Kennedy Airport in New York, that would say, if I ever doubted for 1 minute that the coming of Christ is at hand, I cannot doubt any longer. I have seen the evidence. And I think that every person that made that trip and came back And I saw tears in many of their eyes as they said, we've got to do more. We've got to send more missionaries. We've got to preach harder than we've ever preached before. Jesus is coming, and the world is lost without a hope in the world. And Jesus Christ is the only hope that they have. And He is. And you're the only vessel that God has to take the message to them. May we bow our heads in prayer.